Nobody in the so-called Dark Ages ever called it that. Not the kings, not the scholars, not the people actually living through it. That's right. That name was given later, hundreds of years later. Given by people who needed the past to look worse so they could look better. And if that's true, then one of the biggest periods in human history wasn't just misunderstood, it was rebranded. And not slightly, but completely reshaped in the minds of future generations. So we're talking about 1,000 years of history. 1,000 years, you were told, was backward, ignorant, stagnant, a dark gap between two great civilizations. But during that very same time, a farmer in Northern Europe was using a heavy plow that could cut through dense soil for the first time, expanding agriculture into lands that were once unusable. In another region, windmills and water mills were turning natural energy into consistent production, powering grain, industry, daily life. And in growing cities, the first versions of universities were forming, spaces where structured learning and debate began to take shape. Trade routes were reconnecting regions, communities were stabilizing, ideas were slowly moving again. So either all of this somehow happened in darkness, or the story you were told is missing something important. The term Dark Ages didn't come from the people who lived it. It came later, during the Renaissance, a time when thinkers were trying to revive the culture of ancient Rome and Greece. Their time was called a rebirth. But a rebirth only makes sense if something before it looks like a collapse. So they looked backward and simplified an entire millennium into a single idea: darkness. They simplified. They ignored the nuances. They ignored the regional differences. They ignored centuries of human complexity and reduced it to a single word. But think about that. An entire era defined by people who weren't even there. That's like someone 500 years from now looking at our time and saying, this was the age of confusion. Reducing everything, technology, culture, progress, into something simple, and then accepting it. The label stuck, not because it was accurate, but because it was simple. Simple ideas spread faster than complex truths. The Renaissance thinkers weren't trying to lie. They were trying to define themselves, to say, we are different, we are better, we are advanced. But to say that, the past had to feel small, dark, less intelligent, less sophisticated, because the darker the past looks, the brighter the present feels. And over time, that idea spread through the education system, through paintings, through literature, through stories repeated and repeated, until it stopped being an idea and started being truth. Because once something is repeated enough, it feels true. So we inherited it. We inherited the label. We inherited the assumption. But we never really asked where it came from. And once an idea feels obvious, it becomes difficult to challenge. However, here's where the entire idea begins to fall apart. Even if Europe struggled, the world didn't. In fact, much of the world was accelerating forward. While parts of Europe were reorganizing after Rome, other regions were accelerating forward. In the Islamic world, cities were becoming centers of knowledge. Places like Baghdad, Cordoba, and Cairo were thriving. Ancient Greek texts were not just preserved, they were translated, studied, expanded. Mathematics was advancing with algebra, medicine with detailed observation, astronomy with increasing precision. Imagine this. Scholars working late into the night, oil lamps flickering, pages being copied by hand, debating ideas, questioning assumptions, building on knowledge. Knowledge that would eventually find its way back to Europe. At the same time, in parts of Asia, innovation was moving in entirely different directions. Paper became more widespread. Printing technologies began to emerge. Engineering improved daily life. Large systems, more organized societies, more complex structures were taking shape. So when we call this entire era dark, it's only dark if you ignore most of the world, which, historically, we did. The traditional story sounds simple. Rome falls. Everything collapses. Civilization stops. The Dark Ages begin. Easy to remember, easy to understand, and completely misleading. Because when Rome falls, it doesn't disappear. It fragments. It doesn't collapse into nothing. It redistributes. Instead of one massive system, there are many smaller ones. Smaller leaders, smaller economies, smaller innovations. But here's what's important. When systems become local, something changes. Problems are solved differently. Innovation becomes more experimental. Communities become more self-reliant. And over time, new systems emerge. This is where the story gets lost for most people, because the progress made didn't look impressive. No great empires, no grand monuments, no dramatic turning points. Instead, imagine a farmer standing in a field. The soil is heavy, wet. His tools don't work. Then something changes. A heavier plow cuts through the soil for the first time, which means more crops, more food, more stability, more predictable life. Or imagine a village with a water mill. The river does the work instead of people. More time, more output, more consistency. These changes don't look dramatic, but they are powerful. And when you zoom out, across regions, across generations, you start to see a pattern. Better systems, more efficiency, more production, more people, stronger communities. Not flashy, but foundational. We celebrate fast change. We ignore slow change. But slow change is what builds the future. You've heard this before. Knowledge was lost. But that's not entirely true. In many places, knowledge was preserved. Imagine a monastery, a dimly lit room, shelves filled with pages, handwritten, a single person copying text. One word at a time, one line at a time. Not because it's efficient, but because it's necessary. These places became storage systems for knowledge. And across the world, libraries did the same. Eventually, universities began to form. Places where ideas could be taught, debated, expanded. So instead of darkness, what we actually see is a bottleneck. Knowledge existed. It just wasn't spreading. But when it finally did, it spread rapidly. So step back, look at the pattern. A complex reality reduced to a simple label, repeated over time until it feels true. Not because it is true, but because it is simple. Dark Ages is simple, easy to say, easy to remember. But reality is not simple. It's complex, messy, contradictory. Progress and setbacks happening at the same time. And messy truths don't spread easily, so they get simplified. So this isn't just about history. It's about how history is told. Because if 1,000 years can be simplified into something misleading, what else has been? What other periods reduced to labels? What other ideas flattened into something easy? Not as a conspiracy, but as a shortcut. Because we don't remember complexity. We remember stories. And stories need to be simple. The Dark Ages weren't dark. They were redefined, reshaped, repackaged. A label that survived because it was convenient, not because it was complete. And if that can happen to 1,000 years of history, then the real question is, what are we getting wrong right now?